Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. So, as always, just a huge thank you to everyone who's been watching, everyone who's subscribed so far. I couldn't do this without you guys. Now, obviously, the channel's coming up to its year-long anniversary, which is really, really exciting. I've got some really interesting stuff coming up. I want to add some more content to the channel. If there's any suggestions that you guys want, obviously, I always read your comments. So please feel free and I will get back to you. Any ideas, any suggestions, I'm open to anything. If you are watching and you haven't hit that subscription button yet, then please feel free to do so. Subscription is always free. I will never ask you guys for any money, but like I said, subscription's always free. Hit the notification bell and it always notify you when I'm posting. And that is basically it. So today's case, we're going to be looking at the story of Lee Ford. I'm hoping it's one that you guys are not overly familiar with. I know there's been a few documentaries about this man. He's recently been back in the papers, mainly because he is due up for parole very soon. And there is a change.org petition to keep him in prison once his parole is up. So he's due for parole in 2027. And I'm going to be posting a link to the change.org petition, in the bio to this video. So look out for that. If you've listened to this story and you feel that this man shouldn't be allowed out, then feel free to sign the petition. Now, with all that said and done, we're going to be getting to the story of Lee Ford. So, as always with the videos, I like to go back from the beginning, but to be honest, it was kind of difficult trying to establish who this man was. Like, there's nothing out there that's readily available about his upbringing, about who he was as a child, how his parents brought him up, where he was brought up, even down to the fact that if he had any brothers and sisters, like no one's spoken out about him. What I do know is that he grew up in Telford, which is in Shropshire, and he was born in 1967. In his early 20s, he worked as an occasional labourer. So occasionally he would go into building. Every now and then he would do a bit of roofing work, painting, decorating, that kind of thing. And if he wasn't working, he was spending a lot of time in the local cricket club, where he developed a heavy drinking habit. He was described as really scruffy. You can see in the thumbnail, he's a very, very scruffy man. He was described as someone who lived on the fringes of society. And with all that said and done, he eventually meets a woman in 1990, and this is Leslie Wyatt. Now, Leslie was the complete opposite of who Lee was as a person. So she was a divorced mum of four by the time they met, and she worked as a care work assistant. And she was described as obviously really caring, attentive. You know, she was a mum, she was a carer, she was going to be all them things. It kind of baffles me that someone like Leslie would ever be attracted to someone like Lee. I know it sounds really, really judgmental of me, and especially someone like me, but I don't really care. Like, in my personal opinion, she could have done miles better, but I think that's just the thing about people like Lee. They tend to be very charming at first, and the love bombing and all of that. And then, as you're going to find out in the story, he was nothing of the above. So Lee and Leslie, they marry not long after meeting, and about a year later, they have their first child together, a little boy. So it's Leslie's fifth child, Lee's first. And Lee, he very quickly establishes himself as a controlling person. He's preventing Leslie from seeing and talking to other people, even people in her own family. He's telling her what she can and can't wear, and even stopped her 4 children from seeing their biological father, a man called Michael Tranter, sorry. So Michael said that he would actually go to Lee's house, and he would want to, obviously, understandably, take the kids out. And this was a house in Telford at the time. And Lee would just make excuses that would actually prevent him from seeing his own children. Now, about 5 years into this relationship, Leslie, she had enough. So she packs her bags, she packs the bags of her 5 children, and she leaves the family home. And she escapes to Cornwall and stays in a caravan, which is very close to where her mum lived. So the first Michael knew about this, he arrived unannounced one weekend to try and take his children out. And he was told by a neighbour that Leslie had taken the children and left. So like I said, she was living in a caravan close to her mum's house. And she told very, very few people where she'd actually gone, out of fear of obviously Lee finding her. But Lee, he got the better of her. Obviously, a controller like this, he doesn't want to lose control. And he rings her mum under the guise of being a solicitor. He eventually winds Leslie's mum down and just basically says to her, "Oh, I've got to get in touch with my client, you know where she is." And the mum divulges the information of where her daughter is without realising. So Lee travels all the way down to Cornwall, and he knocks on the caravan door, and he manages, don't know how, but he manages to persuade Leslie to come back to the Telford home. So eventually they get back together. They move to a village called Boogle, and in 1997, Leslie has a 6th child and a second with Lee, so there's a little girl that she has. So Leslie's oldest daughter at the time, her name was Sarah Jane. She was at secondary school, and a childhood friend of hers remembers how she would invite her over at weekends, and then when the time would get closer, these plans would be cancelled. And this is all down to Lee's doing. So not only he wanted to control his wife, he wanted to control his stepchildren as well. So while she never discussed anything for the family life, there were real obvious signs. On one occasion, the class assignment was to draw their family unit, and Sarah Jane said that she didn't want to do this, and she left the classroom in tears. When asked about Lee and who he was as a person, she would only refer to him as Mum's boyfriend. The school friend of hers remembers another time that Sarah Jane just walked down the road with her, and the friend spots Lee from over the road, not knowing who he is, and points him out because of his scruffy appearance. And Sarah just puts her head down. She starts acting really shifty. She gets scared, and she said, "Oh, I've got to go." So it was also noted that the second oldest daughter, Anne Marie, she was quite happy. She very much like her sister, but she would also always avoid any PE lessons. Now, the only person who had regular contact at this time was Leslie's brother. His name was Peter, and he remembered that when Leslie would visit him in his house in Hampshire, she wasn't actually allowed to bring any of her children with her. In 2000, Leslie begins growing suspicious of Lee, and he believes that he's sexually abusing Sarah Jane, who was 17 at the time, and also Anne Marie, who was 16. And this was from an incident where Leslie had opened Sarah Jane's bedroom door and Lee jumped up off the bed. So Leslie, she voices these concerns to Peter. So Peter then makes contact with Michael, who hadn't seen his children in 5 years at this point. He didn't even know where they lived. At this point, the family had moved again. They had gone to a village called Carnkey, which was an extremely remote village in Cornwall. And Peter and Michael, they convinced Leslie to get out and they're going to come get her. And by the time that they travelled there, Lee had basically manipulated Leslie into not leaving him. And this was the last straw for Peter, and sadly he cuts off any contact with her. So this was the last time that Peter actually saw his sister alive. Now, shortly before the events that we're going to be talking about, Michael makes contact with Sarah Jane, so obviously his oldest daughter. At this particular time, she worked for a McDonald's, and he contacts her and basically says, "Oh, I'm your real dad." Probably believing that she wouldn't have any memory of him. And he said that Sarah Jane seemed quite happy to hear from him, but also really concerned. And she basically, it was a real quick phone call. She has to leave at the end of it. And not long after this, he hears back from another family member who tells Michael that the kids want nothing more to do with him. And this is the last time that obviously he speaks to his children. Now, before we get into the events of what actually happened, we're going to look at Leslie and who she was as a person, how she grew up. So Leslie was born as Leslie Wyatt around 1963-64, and she also was born in Telford. This was to parents Les and Margaret Wyatt, and obviously she grew up with her brother Peter. Now, as an adult, Leslie works in a care home, and one particular day in the early 80s, she meets Michael, who's travelling on the same bus with her. They just start talking, they realise they've got quite a bit in common, and they get off the bus together at the same stop. They're just getting on like house on fire, and it sort of turns into a whirlwind romance. Not long after meeting, they get married, and in 1983, she gives birth to Sarah Jane. Not that long, about a few months after Sarah Jane's born, she falls pregnant with Anne Marie, who was born in 1984. They then have their son Stephen Paul in 1986, and the fourth child and a second son called Craig Jonathan in 1987. And not long after Craig's birth, Leslie and Michael, they separated due to a breakdown in their marriage. They were still really good friends. After Michael had moved out, he would still go around and have cups of tea with her, just little general chin chats. They remained quite close and amicable for their children's sake, but it was the pressures of having so many children in a short amount of time that sort of grew this family apart. Now, following this, she then meets Lee in 1990, where the story began. Now, fast forward to late September 2000. So Peter, he ends up getting a phone call from his uncle, who's concerned about Leslie and the kids, and because no one's heard from her. And he asked Peter if Leslie is staying with him, but obviously Leslie's not. The pair aren't talking at the moment. So Peter's then told by his uncle that Leslie has been missing for around a month with all the kids, the Sarah Jane, Anne Marie, Stephen and Craig. She's left her son and daughter that she had with Lee behind, so immediately red flags risen. Why would she only take 4 children and leave behind the 2? So truth was that Lee had actually murdered Leslie and her 4 children with Michael, and he went about any way he could about covering up these crimes by maintaining that Leslie was at Peter's. This was what he was telling people. He took the 4 children's belongings to Leslie's mum's and actually put them up in her loft. He took school bags back to their respective schools, and he tried to claim Sarah Jane's wages from McDonald's. So Peter then contacts Cornwall police and reports his concerns that Lee has actually killed Leslie and the 4 children. So as initial inquiry happens, Lee's spoken to by the police. Police say they plant the seed that they believe him, they let him go. But they know that something is off. They know that something is really off with this man. And Lee is still sticking to his story. And a day later, the investigation is taken to a level and the senior police get involved. And not long after this, a press conference is held, and this is to appeal to anyone to come forward, any witnesses that may have seen Leslie, hoping that it would jog something in Lee's conscience. Not that the man has one, but that's what they're hoping for. So not long after this, Lee takes his 2 children and goes missing himself. However, 2 days later, he's picked up and a warrant is issued for his arrest. But the police were sort of crafty with this warrant, so they made out that he's been arrested for benefit fraud and not for anything to do with Leslie. The senior officer, Chris Borland, while his team are interviewing Lee, he's assembling a team in a separate room. And this is just basically what they're going to be doing next. And while he's going through this, a officer that's under him knocks on the door. She walks in. She basically says to him, I need to talk to you, Gov. And he's like, oh, and this is obviously like a big no-no in the police. You don't do this. He's like, basically points out this. And she's like, no, I really need to talk to you now. So he goes out in the office, and she basically tells him he's made a full confession. Like, he's committed murder. He's murdered five people, and he's buried them under the wooden shed in the garden. So it's soon established that Lee knew that he was wanted, so he had taken his kids back to Telford to drop them off at his parents' house. He confesses to have committed the killings over a 24-hour period, said that he had beaten Leslie with a cricket bat, and out of some weird sort of prick of conscience, or what I more so believe is just to cover his tracks while he was planning the next part of his act, he brings her a cup of tea with some aspirin. He then goes into the garage and he picks up some rope. He takes this upstairs and he strangles Leslie and kills her in the bedroom. So he then claims to have gone down to the kitchen. He calls down the kids one by one. As they walk into the kitchen, he jumps up behind them. He's strangling them. They die. He then hides the body before he calls down the next one. So Lee is then formally arrested. He's charged with murder, 5 counts of murder, and he's then taken by the police to go locate the bodies. So the police begin the search in early October 2000. They work throughout the day and the night. Bearing in mind, obviously, the family have been missing for well over a month now. And they begin looking at the woodshed. And they eventually find Leslie buried with Stephen and Craig under this. But there's no sign of the 2 girls. So Peter, he gets told about what's happening. He drives down from his home in Hampshire to Clenkire. And he's witnessing this. So after a little bit more searching around the house, the police aren't able to find the Sarah Jane or Anne-Marie's bodies. And they speak to Lee again. Now, he claims to have moved them to a nearby potato field, which was around 6 miles away. So police escort Lee up to the field, and eventually they find the bodies of the two girls. Now, post-mortems proved that they had indeed died from strangulation. Obviously, in Leslie's case, there were visible injuries to her brain, despite the 4-week level of decomposition now taking control. So it was then discovered that Leslie had been seeking help from a solicitor the July, so a few weeks before she died. She'd gone to a solicitor to get them to try and help her escape, finally. And this was sort of believed to be his motive for the murders. So she wanted to either have Lee removed from the house or for her to escape with her children. And she told the lawyer that Lee had been sexually abusing Sarah Jane and possibly Anne Marie. Now, despite his initial confession, Lee is then sent to a plea hearing, and he enters a plea of not guilty. So sadly, this means obviously that everything has to go to trial. The trial date was set for the 24th of May 2001. Now, the police and the prosecutors, they built such a strong case against him because of obviously him now denying what he has done. And it's believed that his only reasoning for this was to limit any evidence about his guilt. Even with this, he's trying to take control of this situation. So he ends up changing his plea at the start of the trial to guilty. And like I said, that's his way of trying to take control of the situation. Now, when it comes to sentencing, Lee's given five life terms with a minimum of 27 years before he can be eligible for parole. They obviously take into account his time on remand. So obviously he was arrested in October of 2000. Or September of 2000, sorry. He spent all that time on remand. He's then taken to whatever prison he was on remand in, and when it comes to the 27-year term, they take into account that, so they count him from the year 2000 onwards. Now, so he has to serve the 27 years before he can be eligible for parole. It doesn't mean he's actually going to get it, but he is eligible for parole in 3 years' time, and he'll be 60 years old. Now, as of 2023, he has served his sentence at HMP Durham. Now, remarking on the case, Nigel Pascoe, QC, he was the prosecutor. He said that there was no conceivable reason or justification why Lee had carried out these murders. He's never provided a clean-cut reason for the overwhelming sudden loss of control. As to why Lee had moved the bodies of Sarah and Anne Marie, Nigel added, the defendant must have feared discovery because he removed the two bodies and buried them hastily on the edge of a field. He ended with, the Crown says that such a killing does give an insight into the degree of detachment and planning the defendant did before each murder. On the defendant's account, Stevenson were not one by one, but were carried out throughout the night and into the morning. I couldn't really find much on what was spoken about in the court. I like to obviously look into the sentencing remarks, but this one was kind of difficult trying to find anything to do with the court case. But on sentencing, the judge, Mr. Justice Hooper, said that on all 5 counts, you are going to prison for life. Well, obviously, like I said at the start of the video, beginning in 2021, there were various petitions that have come up. These were launched by Leslie's family and friends of the children. So these petitions demand that Lee is never to be released. He needs to die behind prison bars. And obviously, like I said, it's coming up to 3 years now to go until he becomes eligible for his parole. What I do know is that it's highly unlikely that he is actually going to be given any parole, because he has never fully divulged what actually happened that night, and he's not even said or given a clear date of when the murders took place. All we know is how he actually killed them. Now, Michael, as obviously the children's father, he said, "It's been 21 years of torture, and it has truly changed me as a person. I feel as if I'm the one with the life sentence. After the 20th anniversary, I've been getting more and more anxious, knowing he could be out in a few years' time. For what he has done, he deserves to suffer in prison for the rest of his life. I just want someone to tell me the man who killed my children and their mother will never be free again." So Leslie's brother Peter, he added, "I don't see how he is fit to be released. How is anyone after killing 5 people? He has never shown remorse from what we've been told. And since the day he went to prison, he's going to be 60 years old when he's going to be released. He's still got a life and could make a life. It's not fair. We haven't had a life since it's been on our minds, and it's been hurting all the time. We have suffered way more than what he has ever done." It's real powerful words, obviously, from Peter, and obviously to do with Michael as well. But that is about it I've got for this story. I do apologise again. That is a very short one. It was kind of difficult because there's such limited information on that night in particular. Like I said, he's not even divulged what particular night he committed these crimes on. All he said is that it happened in July. We know that around the end of July, beginning of August, and what he actually done and where he buried them. That is it. And like I said, it's because he's a controller, he's a manipulator. He's trying to manipulate this whole entire thing into his favour, but it's not going to work in his favour. If he doesn't start talking soon or to anyone in prison, it's very unlikely that he's ever going to be eligible for any kind of parole. So, as always, just a huge thank you to everyone who's been watching. I'm really sorry if you can hear that. And Floyd showing off. So just a huge thank you to everyone who's been watching, everyone who's been supporting me. Can't do this without you guys. It's been a lifesaver for the past year or so. If you have been watching these videos since I started a year ago, you will know the personal sort of things that have been going on. So sitting here talking to you guys and you guys listening, the feedback that I have gotten so far, I just really appreciate every single one of you. If you could do me a favour, just leave a like, share this video, subscribe if you haven't subscribed. I'm going to continue working. Like I asked at the beginning of the video, if you have any suggestions on any cases that you want me to cover or any other tips or anything, just let me know. If there's any other content that you want me to create, just let me know. I'll set up a second channel, get working on that. I have a few little ideas in mind. It's just about timing and everything. And yep, that's basically it. Just wanted to reiterate, massive thank you to you all, and I will see you guys real soon for the next true crime story with Silhouette. Take care, guys, and I will see you real soon.